Iron Man's new armor is pretty insane. I'm excited to see what you guys think about it. But before we get into it, we got to cover the first half of this video, which is Amazing X-Men, because we're doing two stories in one video. So what this does is this initially picks up with Cyclops. Now, as part of Age of Revelation, one of the things to know here, in the Overture comic, the minds of Cyclops and Beast from the present day were yanked into the future, because that's when Age of Revelation takes place. Basically, Doug Ramsey, Cypher, who became the heir of Apocalypse, and while he normally has the ability to understand and speak any language, his abilities have been enhanced so that now he can literally control other people and even the planet itself through language, and basically turned Earth into a new Krakoa. That the idea here is that Cyclops and Beast have been brought here in order to essentially help what remains of what you and I might call the X-Men, trying to figure out a way to stop Revelation, right? To stop Ramsey. And so one of the things that had happened in Overture is that when Cyclops and Beast's minds were brought to the present day, initially they were going to launch an attack against Revelation. He ended up learning about it, and then he sent Wolverine. And so Wolverine basically massacred most all of the rebel force that existed out there. And so that's why you pick up with Cyclops, where you ask the question, right? Do you think he survived that, Glob? Zorn unleashed a black hole on him, because Zorn was a mutant that has a black hole for a head. It was kind of a last-ditch attack, and everybody kind of hoped it would be enough. But as you guys know, Wolverine survives everything. And that's literally what Glob says, right? Like the angel of death, Logan, right? The Wolverine, the guy who survived the entirety of the 20th century and only got even more mean once Revelation stripped any humanity out of his head. Yeah, Cyclops, I think he survived that. And Cyclops is like, look, man, don't give me sass, right? I'm asking a legitimate question. Your future X-Men brought my consciousness 10 years forward into your present as part of your scheme to assassinate Revelation. Doug Ramsey gone bad, and it's already fallen to pieces before we've even gotten within 100 miles of Revelation. Magneto, Forge, Archangel, all of them are already dead. And where Glob fires back, right? And he's like, you don't know what I've sacrificed and that kind of thing, right? The response to Cyclops, what you've sacrificed, right? You kidnapped my mind and brought me here, myself and Beast. And that's where he's just kind of like, yeah, we did. And guess what, right? The only way you're getting home now is by making sure Schwarzschild lives long enough to hook you up with our agent in Philadelphia. So whatever you think of your plan, you're in it now. And one of the things to point out here is that Schwarzschild is actually one of 3K's mutants, right? 3K's X-Men, as Beast calls them. For those of you guys who don't know what that is, 3K was an organization that was introduced during the beginning of Jed McKay's X-Men run after the fall of the House of X, right? The end of Krakoa. The idea behind 3K is they were basically activating X genes within mutants or giving X genes to people with the intention of basically creating their own army, right? World domination. And that's effectively where Schwarzschild comes from, right? But again, this is all 10 years in the future. And that's when things get kind of interesting, is because Beast asked the question, where is 3K in all of this, right? And Schwarzschild just says, when the blame for the X virus was put on 3K, they went underground. They cut us, their X-Men, loose. No one knows what happened to them. Zorn became my teacher then, and now he's gone too. Now, that's the other part of this, right? For those of you guys who were kind of joining us for the first time or need a little bit of catch up, the X virus was somewhat akin to the legacy virus, but almost the inverse. That while it will kill normal humans, it amplifies the powers of mutants. And so one of the things that Beast says here is he says, fascinating, right? Revelation outmaneuvered 3K, succeeding where they could not, while placing the blame on their shoulders. I never thought Ramsey had it in him, because Ramsey was never really the war guy. I don't know if I would say Ramsey was a weakling, but I would say he was never inclined to go to war. He would do it if he had to, but it wasn't really his first action. And so Beast is just kind of like, if only I could really analyze this X virus. Fortunately for him, it's all over the place. Almost anybody can analyze this virus. The other part of this is that Wolverine never stopped hunting them, right? On the off chance that Wolverine is still alive, they have to stay on the move. You guys know just as well as anybody else, right? Wolverine tracks by scent. So if they stay static, he will find them, he will kill them, no questions asked. And so in this process, right, of continually moving around and getting to where they need to, one of the things that's cool that goes on here is you actually see Wolverine returning to Revelation, right? Returning to Doug. And where Ramsey can control people with his words, as most of you guys also know, Wolverine's not easily dominated due to any number of factors, right? Mental conditioning, psychic blocks, the whole 9 yards. But those kinds of things don't really seem to work all that well against Doug Ramsey. If this was Purple Man, it might cause him a headache. For example, when Jessica Drew, Spider-Woman, uses her pheromones to try to control people, it gives Wolverine a headache, right? His healing factor counters it. And so that's why when you have Revelation here, he says, Quentin tracked your mind, Wolverine, and I thought it best that you were reoriented after all you went through. And Fabian Cortez responds. He says, my Lord Revelation, you are putting yourself in unnecessary danger. And Ramsey just says, I'm a friend to all mutants, Cortez, and all mutants are friends of mine. Those who are not are aberrations, glitches to be debugged. And I know that does not describe Logan here. Does it, Logan? And Logan kind of grits his teeth because he's seemingly starting to snap out of the control that Doug has over him. And so Doug just says, you want nothing more than to obey me, Logan. You want to kill my enemies for them. But of course, when Wolverine just doesn't really seem to respond, right? Almost kind of seems to be resisting, Fabian Cortez, because he has the ability to boost the powers of others, he boosts the powers of Revelation. Now, these individuals who do this are what are called choristers, but the reality is that they're just acolytes. That's really all it is. And in fact, Fabian Cortez really made his bones as one. Right? For those of you guys who don't know what the acolytes were, they were introduced by Scott Lobdell back in the 1990s. If you remember X-Men, the animated series, the episode Sanctuary, right? When you had Cortez who was just like, I'm the one who heals you, Magneto, and I can take your power away, or whatever it is that he says. That's an acolyte, right? And there were a handful of them. That's kind of what you see here. Fabian Cortez has usually always been that guy, right? He seeks out people with greater power than himself, latches on, and then presents himself as indispensable until such a time that either he doesn't need them anymore, or they don't need him anymore, and either they part ways or they kill him, which that's happened a couple times in Marvel. But the fact is, everybody else here boosts the powers of Revelation, which in turn allows him to dominate Wolverine, right? You want nothing more than to obey me, Logan. You want to kill my enemies for me. And ultimately, he listens. And so Revelation says, good. Now kneel and dress, then rise again as my loyal angel of death and kill my enemies for me, right? Go after the X-Men. And so at that point, you end up picking up with Cyclops and them when they're in a territory that looks somewhat familiar, only for them to realize it's Graymalkin Prison. Now, what's Graymalkin Prison? Okay, so in the aftermath of the fall of the House of X and basically the end of the Krakoa Age, the X-Men didn't actually go back to the Xavier Institute. The groups just kind of scattered to various locations. It was an attempt by Marvel to maintain the themes of Krakoa, which is to say, removing the X-Men from their traditional base of operations and then putting them somewhere else, while also trying to move away from Krakoa at the same time, right? Not living on a single landmass and constantly being attacked by humans. The idea of Graymalkin Prison was introduced in Gail Simone's Uncanny X-Men, along with a woman named Dr. Ellis. Now, Dr. Ellis was really cool. She was kind of like this blend between Amanda Waller from DC Comics and the concept of Genosha from the old X-Men comics. The idea here being that what Dr. Ellis would do is she would basically decide that there were some mutants out there that were just too dangerous to exist. And so what she would do is she would send out Hag. Now, Hag was nuts. Hag was absolutely amazing. Hag was a girl named Sarah Gaunt, who was actually chasing a group of younger mutants called the Outliers that basically allied themselves with the X-Men in order to escape Hag. But Hag was dope, right? The cool thing about Sarah Gaunt, right? Here's what's so crazy about her. She was more durable than Colossus. She was strong enough to break Rogue's arm, and she almost killed Wolverine. It was amazing. Dude, Hag was so incredibly dope in Gail Simone's run, which technically it's still going on. Age of Revelation just kind of stopped the titles, switched them over, and then eventually they'll come back when Age of Revelation is over. But that's one of the things they talk about here, because what Cyclops is told is that when the X-Virus began to spread, Dr. Ellis sealed the prison. It wasn't until Revelation had built up enough followers that he laid siege to Graymalkin after what he found and what she'd done to mutant prisoners, because she was torturing them, right? Sourcechild just says, Revelation had her crucified to send a message because Dr. Ellis didn't have any powers. She was a regular person. As far as I'm aware, we still don't know what her vendetta against the mutant population is, and I'm sure it'll be explored. But I doubt anybody reading the Uncanny X-Men from Gail Simone is any bit too sad about Dr. Ellis being strung out and left to die. God knows she had it coming. But again, that's one of the things that Glob says, right? Like, which goes to show Revelation's not all bad. And so Beast asks, right, has it been left left like this as some kind of a memorial. And Glob just says, no, man, like after all those mutants died real badly, it's insanely haunted. No one comes here because it's a foolish thing to do. And what's kind of nuts is like all these spirits start manifesting around them, and Beast just sort of takes notice about the fact that all these spirits are angry, but they're not attacking them. And that's when Death Dream appears. Now, Hotaru is really, really cool, right? He's interesting. The idea behind him is that his power is basically death and resurrection, but also the ability to communicate with the dead. So he would make an argument in saying that he's not actually alive. Now, the fact that he died and then came back basically indicates that he is alive here, but it's one of the things he says, right? These ghosts are furious, but I've asked them ever so nicely not to murder you or me. Not that that would be a big deal, but I mean, you know, I don't want to die and be reborn again. And so that's when you realize they're here at the Xavier Institute, or the former Xavier Institute, for a particular reason. And in fact, Death Dream was keeping an eye on something for them. And that's the question that's asked here, right? Like, are we good? No one messed with the package? And Notori was just like, no, right? Like, no one comes here but the dead. And I kind of like that. And so once they start sifting through all of this equipment, then at that point, Beast is like, so this is some of Forge's work. And that's where Glob's just like, yeah, right? Like, help me get it up and running. It's a one-shot teleporter, right? We break the trail that Wolverine's following and shortcut to Philadelphia all in one go. And that's where Beast is just kind of like, this is not all just Forge's work. I recognize some of my own handiwork here, right? Like, it must have been before my future self was babbled and so on and so forth. And so that's where Cyclops is like, so what's the plan, right? Like, what's the goal here? We get to Philadelphia, and then what? I mean, Philadelphia is the base of operations for Revelation. Like, are we just gonna go charging in to a citadel, arguably the most heavily guarded place in the world, and just start firing off shots and hope we don't die? But at that point, Source Child is just like, we've got allies there. We rendezvous with them and salvage what we can of this mission. With so many dead, we're operating dangerously under strength. But that's where Cyclops tells him, look, like, before I go back, you and I are going to have a talk about 3K and what I need to know in my own time. Because one of the things to keep in mind is that Cyclops and them are still trying to figure out how to contend with 3K in the present day. They don't have a full understanding of everything that 3K is capable of. So Source Child here in the future is an incredible and untapped source of information. And so that's where he just tells Cyclops, if we survive this, I will tell you whatever you want to know. The problem with this is Wolverine shows up. And Wolverine shows up literally at the worst time because they don't even have this teleporter fired up yet. So now they're gonna have to play some measure of a distraction while they try and get this teleporter working. The great thing about this is that as much as we all love Wolverine, we also recognize he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. The other problem with this, especially for Cyclops, because it's one of the things that's going on with him in the Age of Revelation, he's blind. He cannot see. And that's why he's given a spot, right? Fire that direction. And of course, he fires off, but ultimately he misses. And so at that point, it's like, okay, he's coming in hard and fast, and I'm not gonna be able to put him down. So they end up reaching out to Death Dream, right? Activate your ghosts, create a perimeter, have them serve as some measure of a distraction against Wolverine. If we can keep him at bay, then we can get the teleporter up and running, and we can bail out of here. And so that's where Hotaru is just kind of like, I'm not afraid of dying, Cyclops, but I am afraid of him. I always have been. And Cyclops tries to reassure him, right, that you have to focus here, that you can't let yourself get distracted, you can't get caught up in the emotion of the situation, but it doesn't matter because Wolverine comes running up on that kid and takes him out. And so at that point, there's no one controlling the ghosts. You do have Beast who's powering up the teleporter, but immediately they go after Wolverine with the intention of attacking everybody else. The cool thing about this is that as they make a break for the teleporter, one of the things that Cyclops says, he says, Logan, I know you're still in there and I am not giving up. And so they jump into the teleporter and they get out of there as fast as humanly possible by the skin of their teeth, if we're being quite honest. The issue with this is they teleport to Philadelphia. The problem is that it's not the Philadelphia that it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to be very reminiscent of Krakoa. And so Cyclops is like, is this Philadelphia, right? This all looks normal. Did we go back to my time? And it's just kind of like, no. And Glob is just like, we're totally screwed. And so Beast is just like, I mean, why? Like, can someone fill me in on where we are and why we're so screwed. And so Swarchild is just like, with all the ghosts and everything, the teleporter glitched. We are in Providence. And so at that point, Cyclops is like, well, someone fill me in because I'm not from this timeline. Right? I don't know what Providence is. Right? We just escaped a haunted ruin. Compared to that, this place kind of looks like heaven. And so Cyclops is told, Revelation controls the entire eastern seaboard, Cyclops, except for Providence. No one is stupid enough to invade this place. What would make him afraid to take this place in the first place, right? And that's where somebody comes out of nowhere and just says heaven, right? That's a dirty word around here, Cyclops, but you should know that. Just like you should know not to enter my territory, because they have stepped into the land of Ileana Rasputin, but not just Ileana Rasputin, her Darkchild persona, who's in control of Psylocke and Juggernaut. With that being said, guys, let's talk about Iron Man's suit. So here's the cool thing, right? This is the Iron and Frost comic. It's part of Age of Revelation, and clearly it builds on the whole House of X, Emma Frost and Tony Stark getting together type thing. And that's one of the things that happens, right? That what ends up taking place is Emma Frost is in New York City itself, where she says, I never thought I'd find myself back here, never dreamed that I would want to return. That was before I heard the rumors. I should have known this is where they would lead me, following the glyphs, the stories, a cure for the virus, a sanctuary for mutants. It all led to where it began and where it ended, because there was a massive fight that took place at Avengers Mansion out here in New York 6 years ago, 4 years from this present day. And it's this fight with Firestar, Emma Frost, Tony Stark, and James Rhodes against what are basically the Seraphim of Revelation. Basically younger mutants who believe in his cause. And when I say believe, I mean, they are believers, right? They would die for this man's cause. The kicker is that it's not entirely certain why it is that they're here, but of course, Emma Frost, having telepathy, picks up on it pretty fast. The person they're actually here for is a girl named Eris, who's being protected by her mom. Now, of course, her mom wears a gas mask to keep herself protected from the effects of the X virus, otherwise she would immediately succumb to it and die, because she's a human, but Eris is a mutant. And while no one knows what Eris's power is, the intention of the Seraph is to take her from her mother and bring her to Revelation so she can basically be brainwashed and inducted into Revelation's belief systems, right? Bolstering his numbers. What's crazy about this is that Emma Frost is engaging in double duty on a few different fronts, right? The first one is she's trying to protect this girl and her daughter. The second one is she's trying to fight these guys. And as you would imagine, right, basically these young believers, these agents of Revelation, clearly they're protected from like telepathy, right? Mental conditioning, that kind of thing. And so ultimately the powers of Emma don't really work as well as you would expect. A lot of the offensive work really comes down to like Iron Man, Firestar, and James Rhodes, because they're essentially the heavy hitters. The issue with all of this is that with Carmilla, also having been a former acolyte and now an agent of Revelation, having basically a kind of psionic armor that she can both use to protect herself as well as offensively to attack people, not that dissimilar from like a Green Lantern, she attacks Emma Frost and then she goes for Eris's mom, knocks the mask off her mom, and Eris's mom dies. And when that happens, Eris loses it. And she just literally says, like, I will never join any of you. And in that moment, she just hammers the ground as hard as she possibly can, which basically comes to show that she's a terrakinetic. She can control the ground. And so Emma Frost just chimes in and she says, most people, the X virus killed, like Eris's mother. Others, it changed, enhancing their abilities. Eris got lucky with powers manifesting. Carmilla got what she deserved, because literally Eris uses the ground and just like impales Carmilla with just all these rocks. So this is literally what it would look like if Toph was willing to kill. But in the midst of all of this, the ground starts shaking. Tony Stark runs a seismic scan and he's told, right, tectonic instability detected. And that's where he says, Emma, the earth is about to move and not in a good way. And Emma's just like, tell me something that I don't know, right? Like, and she just says, Eris, listen up, right? Change of plan. Avengers Mansion is not safe. You need to come with us. And Eris wants to be with her mom, but Emma just tells her, like, your mom's gone, right? There's nothing that we can do. I know it hurts. I know it sucks, but we can grieve for her later. We got to leave now. At that point, Marrow is just like, the child has made her choice, Frost. Now she dies. She chose not to join Revelation. We kill those who do not join our side. And so Firestar shows up and goes to attack Marrow. The problem with all of this is that Firestar is a heavy hitter. Think of her as like a little bit of a weaker version of Johnny Storm or Sunfire in Marvel Comics. But because of the virus and its ability to quote unquote enhance the powers of others, Firestar's abilities suddenly start spiking and she loses the ability to control her powers to the point that she actually starts going supernova. And that's what James Rose says, right? Like her power's spiking, she's going nuclear, and even Tony Stark is like, my armor shields are at critical. If she keeps going, she's going to nuke this whole area and we're all going to die. Now, fortunately, of course, James Rhodes, Tony Stark, they're always kind of prepared for some situation like this, if for no other reason than some villain who's gone haywire and has to be put down in some capacity. So James Rhodes just ends up emitting a kind of cryo-dampening foam that at the very least encases Firestar and essentially brings her down. The issue is that in the midst of all of this, because of what it is that Eris did in hitting the ground, she basically created a sinkhole. And so where Marrow goes after Eris, Emma Frost jumps in the way to protect Eris and gets stabbed through the chest. And Tony Stark freaks. And that's the crazy thing, is because Emma comments on this. She says, I heard Anthony yell, heard panic in his voice, the horror. Until then, I'd never truly known what he felt about me, about us. We had dated, married under a false identity, probably why it seemed like we were both just putting on an act. It was just a fling, I told myself over and over. Remember, that's one of the things that happened during the fall of X. Because of the fact that mutants were basically outlawed, right, on the federal level, like they essentially lost all their rights, Emma Frost married Tony Stark, transferred her wealth to him, which allowed the Resistance to basically continue fighting by using money that Tony Stark could funnel directly to her. But throughout it all, Emma Frost never really took it seriously, but she was lying to herself. She was actually in love with Tony Stark. Why? Because Tony Stark is one of the only men in the entirety of the Marvel Universe brave enough to climb Mount Frost and come back for seconds. And so that's why she says it was a distraction, right? What a time to learn the truth, that I was actually in love with Tony Stark. So the entirety of Avengers Mansion goes crashing down into this massive sinkhole. And James Rose is just like, Tony, the mansion. But Tony doesn't care, right? Do you think I care about the damn building, right? And that's where Emma says, she'd killed me. I knew it. Marrow knew it. Not that it did her any good. Me, I had to survive. The only way I knew how. My secondary mutation allows me to turn as hard as diamond, cold and unfeeling, but alive, at least for now. I'd likely die the moment I shifted back to flesh and blood, and my telepathic gifts were denied to me when in this diamond form. But what other choice do I have? And so that's where she just crash lands on the ground. And so where Tony Stark and James go down into this hole, the idea of James Rhodes is they need to find Eris. They have to find the girl. They have to save her. That was their mission, to protect this girl. It's what Emma Frost died for, because James is convinced that Emma's dead. Tony doesn't want to believe it. And he says, you don't know that, Rhodey. Bioscan full sweep. And like literally his suit, right? The boss AI scans the entire area. It doesn't find a heartbeat or anything. But ultimately, Emma Frost is alive and in her diamond form. And that's one of the things that happens, is because Tony Stark wants to keep hunting. He wants to keep looking. But James is like, we have to get the girl. We have to leave. It's only a matter of time before more forces from Revelation show up here. And the reality is, he could send any number of people. And if he sends his assassin, if he sends Wolverine, we're all but done for. And so that's when he gets a response from Emma, right? She says, here, right? I am here. And James says, Tony, I'm sorry, really I am, but we cannot stay. And literally Tony's just like, Emma, right? Like he wants to go rescue her. And James just says, Emma wanted to protect the girl. If more Seraphim come looking, and that's where Emma's like, go. Right, leave, get out of here. And so Tony's just like, fine, right, but we are coming back. She's not staying down there. Like, I am not going to leave her there. And so you pick up in this 10-year period, right? 6 years later. And Emma just kind of comments, typical of him really, right? As if I was going to lie around waiting to be rescued. Funny thing is, 6 years later, and I'm climbing back into the same hole. The irony is not lost on me, even in this state. All that time I spent digging myself out, inch by torturous inch. If Tony ever did come back, I was long gone. Now, once I surfaced, and I spent years moving west trying to find any of my X-Men, but to no avail. I was alone, and you'd think I'd be used to it by now. But then I saw the glyphs hearkening me back, right back to this old building down here in the ground, which has now been christened as the HELLFIRE Club. And so that's where this woman comes out of nowhere and addresses Emma Frost, right? And it's like, well, I mean, I guess it depends on who you're asking, lady, whether or not this is the HELLFIRE Club. And Emma recognizes it as Eris, right, who's used her powers over telekinesis to literally hold Emma Frost in place using the very ground itself. And it's one of those crazy things. She says, it's been a while, Miss Frost. We all thought you were dead. I go by landslide these days. And she says, I guess we've all changed, some more than others. And she asks her, right, that hole in your chest, does it hurt? And Emma's just like, I'm not here for small talk, right? And that's where Eris is like, I mean, then why come back here? Why take a stroll down memory lane into this sinkhole that used to be the Avengers Mansion? And at that point, Emma's just like, Iron Man, if what I've heard is true, and Tony Stark appears out of nowhere, right? That he can repair your broken heart. And Emma's just like, so you did return. Like, pity that it was too late. And Tony just says, I needed a place to work, somewhere Revelation would never look. And Emma just says, I heard you're looking for a cure for the virus. And she just asks him, right, Anthony, why she says his name. And that's where Eris is like, I told you, things had changed. The man you knew is gone, Emma. All hail the Iron King. Because Tony Stark is no longer Tony Stark anymore. This suit of armor is seemingly sentient. Tony Stark turned himself into a robot. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed these two stories. Let me know if you guys want me to do this again, because this is how we used to do it back in the day with crossover events when we did Civil War. Let me know how you guys feel about this. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.